Hey, this is Jacob Evan. Thanks for tuning in. In this video, I want to tell you about my favorite scripture software, which is called ISA2. I'm going to tell you about the pros and cons of it, and then I will explain how to set up the program with some suggested settings, and then I will demonstrate how to use it and some of the things which you can do with it. There will be timestamps for different sections of the video, so you can jump there if you would like. What is ISA2? It is an interlinear scripture application. It allows you to search the text via English and Hebrew. It allows you to investigate a given Hebrew word and easily look across its different forms in the text. This is far more useful than trying to search the text for an English word and then trying to compare verses in that way, because translations are often not consistent. They're not consistent in how they go from Hebrew to English. And by doing that approach, you may not even be finding all the instances of the same Hebrew word when it comes down to it by searching just by English. And even worse, you may be finding words which are not even the same Hebrew word at all. And this program is very helpful for the study of the text if you care about the Hebrew text. ISA2 is free. It can be downloaded via the website scripture4all.org. Scripture, the number 4, all.org, and you can check the link in the description box. There is a newer version which is called ISA 3, and in my view, version 2 is vastly superior. If you go to the website the normal way to go to the download, you have to go to where it says download ISA 3, which is a little bit confusing. And then along the way, there's an additional option that you can pick to download version 2. So be aware of that whenever you go and get it. There are a few things you should be aware of with this version. Whenever you close ISA2, it will tell you that you need to update to the newer version, and just ignore that. Also, if you use this long enough, you'll probably get this error at some point that will prevent you from switching from verse to verse. It'll have range check error or something along those lines. For this reason, you will want to keep the setup file on your hard drive even after you install it, so that in the future you'll be able to uninstall and reinstall ISA2 whenever that happens, especially in case the developer decides to shut down the site at some point. Keep the install file just in case. And that should resolve that issue if that error comes up. If you are the sort of person who is wanting to find works of man which are perfect, or find a person who teaches exactly perfectly with 100% knowledge, I imagine it will be very frustrating trying to chase that into the future. And this will surely not be satisfactory to you if that's the case. However, if you are able to work with the knowledge that these tools are imperfect, they are not perfect, and that you are going to continue seeking truth regardless of what the maker of this tool or some translation says, then this will be very helpful to you as an additional tool to accompany your other resources such as other lexicons, and your other studies, such as learning and study of Hebrew, of which this may help, but it does not serve as a substitute for it. Ideally, you need to have some knowledge of Hebrew. Otherwise, I would suggest being particularly careful about conclusions that one might draw from this. That being said, a person can draw faulty conclusions no matter what resources, no matter what knowledge the person has. We just have to be willing to acknowledge that fact and continue to learn, have the insight that we are still learning. We're inevitably going to make mistakes along the way, and we're still going to seek the truth. If we accept that, ISA2 is a powerful tool for the toolbox. Now, what are the potential issues with ISA2? First off, it uses the King James Version by default for its main English translation. And, of course, the King James Version is a flawed translation. It is like every English translation in that it is not perfect. It has its flaws, like every translation, and some of them are more obvious than others. But in my opinion, when it comes to the Pentateuch, there aren't really that many more issues that I would draw attention to compared with the JPS or other translations for that matter. For your information, my favorite commercial translation right now of the Pentateuch is the Everett Fox translation, but even that has renderings that I do not prefer, and this is just a fact of using any translation. The same thing applies to the translation which is present underneath each Hebrew word in ISA 2, the word-by-word CHES translation. It is not perfect, nor should it be assumed to be perfect, just like any translation. The way it renders the name of Elohim is not correct, and there are some other words which are not correct. And of course, there are some words which we probably don't know the meaning of, and that may sometimes be obscured as well, just like with most translations. The morphology seems to be good most of the time, the way it parses out the forms of each Hebrew word, although that is not perfect. I will say the morphology is vastly superior compared with certain apps on the market that appear to have been just made by people who do not understand Hebrew at all. And also it uses Strong's Concordance and Dictionary. Strong's is not perfect, just like any concordance, dictionary, or lexicon. For what it is worth, the lexicon I prefer of the ones which I have used is the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament by Kohler and Baumgartner. That one may be hard to find now in its more exhaustive format. You may be able to find an abridged form of it more easily, but it will lack certain details. Of course, that lexicon is surely not perfect either, and there are other resources which may be useful to accompany that, such as resources for other Semitic languages like Akkadian, Ugaritic, and Phoenician. And any good lexicon will have references and bibliography to research certain claims for those words. With ISA 2, I advise that you do not just read the interlinear word-by-word translation and assume that it is superior to other translations just because it's word by word. You will start to come up with some weird wordings and some unique ideas if you do that, and it may seem like a realization of truth, but a seeming realization is not always actually true. And just because something is new and unique, of course, doesn't mean it's true either. There is a reason why translations are not done mechanically. And even though before I knew any Hebrew, I used to think that a mechanical translation would be surely the best way to read the Hebrew text from English, I have continued learning since then, and I realized that is not the case. That approach, that mechanical approach, can produce just as many or more problems compared with your typical translation. As we probably know, Hebrew words have different categories of meaning from English words, so you will not find an exact replacement in English in most cases. Therefore, there is a basis for using different English words to translate one Hebrew word in different contexts. Also, similar-looking Hebrew words may actually be unrelated to each other despite looking the same. There is such a thing as different roots for a similarly spelled Hebrew word, and that requires additional study to confirm that rather than just going by one's gut or just assuming that all similarly spelled words are the same, because they are not. Also, there are specialized uses of some words which produce different meanings depending on the context or the phrase. For those reasons and others, mechanical translations are far from ideal, but they could be used as a tool. If you just want to read this as a translation, then I would suggest just get the Everett Fox translation or another translation and use it instead. Now I want to talk about initial setup and suggested settings. After you install ISA 2 and start it up for the first time, it should look something like this. And the first thing I'm going to do is switch to a better location in the text, and you can do that by clicking OT here at the top, and I'm going to go to Deuteronomy 11:1, and I'm going to do that by clicking Deuteronomy and then 11 and then 1. Now let's talk about settings, and this is roughly what you should see at this point if you're in the Hebrew Bible portion of the program, the OT as some people call it. And one of the first things I'm going to suggest that we do once we're in the Hebrew section of this program is click on View and then click on Right to Left. Make sure that this right to left is checked, because that way it will ensure that the Hebrew is oriented in the proper way, that you're reading it from right to left, and just be aware that if you're looking at the English, you'll have to read that right to left as well. Right to left word order. You can go to View, Zoom, Zoom in, or just hit Control and plus at the same time, and I'm going to do that a few times. This is up to you what you want to do. Also, you can go to View and then Fonts, and I'm going to go to where it says INTCHES, the Interlinear translation, and where it says Courier New next to that. And I'm going to click that and change it to Times New Roman. That's just my personal preference. Feel free to pick whatever you want. Feel free to leave it as it is. Now let's look at the options for what is displayed in the interlinear text. Now right here we have the Westminster Leningrad Codex Hebrew text with the vowel pointing by default. And below that, there is a transliteration, which I'll talk about shortly. And then there is this CHES word-by-word translation underneath that. Now, for some people, you're going to want to just maybe disable everything except for the Hebrew. And for other people, you may have different desires for it. You can do this by going to the Interlinear button at the top bar and pick the different options on this drop-down menu that you want to either enable or disable. The transliteration is not very useful in my opinion. It doesn't actually tell you how to pronounce the word. It doesn't account for the vowels, so it's not very useful in my view. Maybe if you're wanting to learn the Hebrew consonants, maybe that could help you. I'm not sure. There are probably more efficient ways to do that. I would suggest disabling it by clicking WLC_TM. If you don't want to see the vowel pointing and just want to see the consonants, you can just select the WLC option. And if you don't want to see the English translation, you can select the CHES option. And if you want to see the Strong's numbers, you can click Strong. Feel free to just play with that, select your preference on that. There are many other customization options, but that is all I will be doing for now. Now, how do we use the program in a basic sense? There are a number of ways to navigate between verses. You can scroll from where it displays the currently selected verse, or you can scroll and select on the sidebar here. You can also go to the top bar and click OT, then select the book, chapter, and verse. If you want to access the Strong's dictionary, which, as mentioned before, Strong's has flaws, it's far from perfect, you can right-click on a word in the interlinear area here, and then make sure that Strong Notes is the one that's checked. And once that is selected, then you can just left-click on a word and it will bring up the Strong's dictionary entry. There are some other things you can do from here which can be useful even if you don't like Strong's. For example, you can quickly navigate to other forms of the word by double-clicking on the other strong numbers in the entry. You can also go forward and back by entry number by clicking the plus and minus buttons. There is also this CV button, which is very useful, but I'll talk more about that in a bit. Now let's talk about the search function. You can either search by the King James Version translation by clicking Search and Translation, or you can search by the Hebrew text or by the CHES Interlinear translation by clicking Search and then Interlinear. For example, if you want to search for an English word based on the KJV, I would click Search and then Translation. I will search for the word add, just as an example. And then it will show the search results toward the bottom. You can resize this area if you so choose by clicking and dragging at the border of it. It will show the list of verses with that English word present, and you can navigate them by either clicking up and down on this left bar, or you can click up and down on this middle bar to select an individual verse from the list. Let's also talk about searching by interlinear. You can click Search, Interlinear, and you will want to make sure you're in the Hebrew Bible already, otherwise it's going to display Greek here. There are several different options you can use. If you want to search by the Hebrew consonants without the vowel pointing, click in this box here, which is next to WLC at the top. And then you can either type using the buttons above the search box. You can click the Hebrew buttons up here at the top of this window. Or you can type using a Hebrew keyboard layout, which you can set up on your PC separately from this. And there are guides on the internet on how to do that. You can also type a star or asterisk at the beginning, end, or in the midst of a search term to serve as a wildcard. For example, you may choose to type a star at the beginning and or the end of a Hebrew word so that you can catch the different suffixes or prefixes which may appear. There is also another way you can search by Hebrew word, which is better for finding most of the instances of the word, in my opinion, across the different forms of it, but we will talk more about that shortly. You can also search with the vowel pointing or by the Strong's number, or using the CHES translation in each of these other boxes here. Just make sure the other boxes are cleared out if you don't want them to be included in the search. So if you already typed something in another box, make sure you erase that before typing something in another box, unless you want to include both of them. Now let's look at some of the other navigation features which I find to be very useful, such as the Hebrew Concordant view and the ability to search by word from the text itself. If you search for a Hebrew word, there will be an additional button on the search results area here which says CV, like we saw with the Strong Notes section. CV stands for Concordant View. If you click CV, it will send the information from the search results into the Concordant View area. You can resize it by clicking and dragging at the border of it. If you do this, you can look for a particular form of the word. You can look for a particular vowel pointing, etc. Then if you click on an individual row, it will send that information down to the search results area. And by doing that, you can either narrow your search or isolate different forms of the word. Then if you want to go back to showing all of the forms that you originally searched for, you can click this SR button here to send the entire list back into the search results unfiltered. Let's also look at searching from a given word in the interlinear. When you're looking at the interlinear text, you can right-click on a word. This will bring up a menu so that you can set what the left click will do whenever you click on a word. And if you click the search option, you can search by the Hebrew consonants, by the Hebrew with the vowel pointing, and you can also search by the Strong number, which I think is pretty useful in my opinion, despite all the issues with Strong's itself. For example, here I will search by a Strong number, which is what I usually do just for ease of navigating by different Hebrew words across their different forms. And so the reason I do this is because it picks up most of the other forms of the word, not just the exact spelling which we clicked on when we decided to search. Of course, your personal choice may vary depending on your goal. So I'll click on this Strong number, which is the letter H followed by a number, and it will put it into the search box automatically, and then I will just click search. Now the search results will show the different forms for that particular Strong entry, and you can navigate this similarly to before. Something you may want to know is that not every Strong entry in ISA 2 has been done correctly. There are a few mistakes in the program itself, and sometimes an entry will not display correctly, and sometimes in the Strong Note section, there will be a cross-reference that goes to the wrong place. But that is only a small number of them. It's just something you may want to be aware of, and it should be obvious if that happens. And with Strong's itself, sometimes words are separated into different entries, which I personally might not do. And sometimes other Hebrew words may be combined into the same entry, which I also would not do. That's just one of the issues with imperfect tools, and I am sure that my approach would be far from perfect as well, for that matter. So that's another reason I suggest having additional resources to look at alongside this. With the Strong's number dictionary entries, it is sometimes useful to check other nearby entries, and you can do that a number of different ways. One option is to just go to the dictionary or the Strong Notes like before. You can right-click on a word and then select Strong Notes. You can click plus or minus on the strong notes window that pops up. And then you can also click the CV button here, and that will send the results to the Concordant view area. And from there, you can also click plus or minus to navigate in that way. There are many other things which you can do with this program, so hopefully this will just serve as a basis or foundation for beginning your studies with it. So what are two quick examples of how I might use this program? Let's say I wanted to study Deuteronomy 22:5. I would initially just go to Deuteronomy 22:5, and let's say I'm wondering about the meaning of kli gever. What does kli gever mean? And that's what the King James Version renders as that which pertaineth unto a man. For my personal approach, I would want to start by doing two things. See how the word or phrase appears across the text, across the different contexts in the text, and see what my other resources have to say about the words in question. At some point along the way, I may also reference traditional opinions or writings on a subject, but I just treat those as exactly that, the opinions of some person, which may be more or less correct or more or less informed, just like other resources for that matter. So if I'm using ISA 2, I'm probably in the process of checking how a word or phrase is used across the text. And spoiler alert for this particular study, the phrase kli gever does not appear anywhere else in the text. And so I will want to look at these two words separately, and perhaps words which are related to each of those words, especially the word gever. At least some knowledge of Hebrew is going to be necessary, especially when you are trying to find related words, because you're probably not going to know how to look for them without having a little bit of knowledge about that. Most concordances or lexicons are not going to inform you of that. Practically speaking, I will probably not be using the strong notes function at all. I am just going to search, and usually I will search by the strong number because, in my opinion, it's the most efficient way to go about this. So I'm going to either right-click on the Hebrew word kli and click search, or just click on kli to bring up the search if I already have the search option selected from before. And then I'm going to click the strong number and click search. Now it found 325 different examples in the text. And ideally, you probably want to look at all of the different examples in the text and check the surrounding contexts as appropriate. If you're looking for a particular form of the word, then I might click this CV button to bring up the concordant view and narrow the results that way. I will also recognize, with skepticism, how a given lexicon breaks down different uses for the word. And I'll probably look over the Hallett, the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, just as a matter of routine, and see the different meanings or uses which are claimed for a given word. And if there are some interesting or unique ones that would help, I will check those references in particular. And I will also look at the potential roots, the potential cognates. That is vaguely how I would begin a study of a given topic. Alternatively, if I am trying to find all of the commands which are related to a particular topic, I will try to find the key Hebrew words which are used in that subject matter, and then search by those words to see other possible instances in the text. And this could be as simple as just going to different verses that we know about regarding a command, and then searching by the words which appear in those verses. And then if there are some that do not show up, some verses that we know about that do not show up, then also checking those and checking how those are worded. That is another way that I might use ISA 2. There are many possibilities for how to use this program. It is a very useful tool. It is another tool for the toolbox. So feel free to check it out. And feel free to make sure that we all continue learning and continue improving our awareness and continue updating our observance and our service of Elohim. Thank you for watching.